today and welcome. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Reusables in Restaurants. We're going to be covering some amazing insights that we've gotten from some door-to-door research that our various organizations carried out with food service businesses across 7 Toronto neighborhoods. And in addition to these results, we were really excited to share what these strategies are in hopes that you can implement similar guidelines that we have as well. My name is Susan. I am with the U of T Trash Team and I do our community and volunteer programs. And next slide, Rafaela. On to the next slide. Thank you. So before we begin, I do want to recognize the history of the lands that we call home. We're very thrilled to have people joining us from all over, and we extend our acknowledgements to the Indigenous and traditional past across all territories. Specifically, we acknowledge the diverse and unique groups of Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. In our local work, we acknowledge we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and it is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the William Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. We have a suggested resource that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Nativeland.ca is a great way to learn more about your own region where you're from. Okay, so on to the next slide. Just very quickly, we have a lot of things that you'll learn from today. I won't spend too much time here, but you can expect to hear more about our research, as well as learning about our approaches so that you can implement these in your own neighborhood. Next slide. And so these are the speakers that we'll introduce shortly. Rafaela, as well, from the University of Toronto Trash Team, who does a lot of social science and educational programming. We're joined as well by Emily with Toronto Environmental Alliance, who does phenomenal work with campaigns. We have Vince Shute from Enviromentum, who will take us through some more about the approach that we learned. And we have Maithri, who was working with us over this past summer as part of the University of Toronto Trash Team and has done phenomenal work. So next slide. For the agenda for what we'll cover, Rafaela is going to give an introduction to the problem of single-use foodware and the findings that we had from our research. Then we'll get into how we got to these findings. What were our methods? Maithri will share a little bit of firsthand experience, and Vince will go into depth into a really great technique called motivational interviewing, which was very foundational to our work. Emily is then going to start talking about how we can start to make changes. What happens in your own community? What are some policies and where can you have an impact? We're then going to have time for a Q&A. And when we get to that point, I'll explain how that will work. In the meantime, if there's questions that come up throughout the webinar, please just type those in the chat, and our speakers, if they're able to answer, will answer you right then, and we'll collect the rest for the Q&A. And if you notice during the registration, we will have an optional 30-minute discussion once the webinar has wrapped to apply these lessons in your own community. So our speakers will have some more one-on-one opportunity for conversation. And with that, so that's what you're going to learn from us. Quickly, we would like to learn from you. We have a very short Mentimeter about what you're hoping to learn today. So you can follow the link here on the screen that should be in the chat shortly. You can scan the QR code, or you can enter the code on the screen at menti.com. And we'll start to see everyone's answers up on the screen momentarily. That means I should start sharing my screen. Just one moment. Okay. So we'll see. I'm just looking to the screen in the left. I think, Chelsea, can you just put the link in the chat for the Mentimeter? We have Chelsea from our team behind the scenes on tech support today. Perfect, thank you. Then we'll just give this another maybe about 10-15 seconds to see where people are learning. If you want to add any more discussion that you can't share here by a click of a button, you can just share that in the chat as well. But we'll also engage in our Q&A as well. Definitely looking to learn more about reusables. Excellent to see that there's a lot of people here interested in the data to help inform policy. Policy is such a great way to make change, as well as grassroots campaigns. There's value in various approaches, so we will share more of those with you today. Okay, Well, I'm going to, oh, now all these, so I was just about to stop sharing and a few new answers popped in. It's beautiful to see diversity in some of the answers here. Okay, so Rafaela, you can go back to sharing to the screen, back to the presentation. And with that, I'll also bring on Rafaela to really start with the full context of our presentation and go into more of the background of single-use plastics and how we got where we are today.
All right, thanks, Susan. And hello, everyone. I'm Rafaela from the University of Toronto Trash Team, and thank you so much for being here today. It's really a pleasure to talk about our outreach research with all of you. But first, let's review the problem. The fact is, we consume a lot more resource than we can manage, and this has a big environmental impact. Plastic is the starkest example of this. Plastic is made from fossil fuels, and its production is increasing. It is expected that by 2050, we will be using 3 times more plastic compared to 2015. And here in Canada, half of all plastic waste produced each year is for single-use products and packaging, including single-use foodware. And when we are done with it, unfortunately, only 9% has been recycled globally. Specifically about single-use foodware, we consume a lot of items that is used only once and then discarded. And by foodware, we mean utensils, straws, cups, food containers, sear sticks, all the things used to serve food in local restaurants. For example, Canadians use 1.6 billion single-use cups every year. And here in Toronto, a leader audit from 2022 conducted by the city showed that 26% of all large items were foodware. So it's evident that single-use foodware is also an important source of pollution. We are also seeing in Canada groups work on this issue and policies being implemented to reduce the use of those items. Knowing the problem about single-use, specifically about single-use foodware, the UFT Trash Team and Toronto Environmental Alliance are working together since 2021 with the overarching objective to understand the challenges and opportunities for local businesses to switch from single-use to reusable foodware. And this project has 3 phases. Right now, we are in phase 3, and that's what we are focused on today. But I want to briefly share the phases 1 and 2 because they informed our 3rd phase. So in phase 1, through an in-depth interview with 12 businesses around the city, we explored their perspectives on reducing single-use foodware. And then on phase 2, we focus on one specific area, the harborfront, to learn what support businesses and also customers needs to reduce single-use foodware. And as you can see here, the phase 3 has part A and B. The part A, we want to assess the participation and motivation levels among local businesses. That's what we are sharing today. We also have a pilot project with 6 restaurants that were implementing reusable alternatives. We are wrapping up the pilot project and we will share the results in the fall. So the report, you can find our reports in our website. And I think Chelsea will share the link soon. During the first 2 phases, we have learned that businesses are interested in and willing to shift to reusable foodware, but need guidance on how best accomplish this. We asked business what support they need to participate, and they want more access to information. And specifically guidance on public health about safe handling of reusables and a list of suppliers with sustainable alternatives. On the other hand, customers support actions to reduce single-use foodware, but few customers are participating. So based on what we learned from the previous 2 years of study, we designed a research going door to door to identify types of restaurants, their foodware practices, and the types of solutions implemented. We also want to assess the business motivations and readiness to reduce single-use foodware in multiple neighborhoods here in Toronto. Finally, we want to share resources and encourage them to promote their current practices. In phase 3, it wasn't only the UFT trash team and tea. We were able to partner with Enviromentum, Green Neighbours Network, and its member groups. This made our research more exciting, more challenging, bigger, and diverse. For the UFT trash team, this project was supported in part by partners in Project Green, so thank you. I want to share here the behind the scenes. You can see our beautiful group of, we had 8 research assistants and a lot of volunteer supervisors in this project. So thank you so much for all your hard work on this. This time, our research aimed not only to collect data, but also to provide resources to businesses and motivate them to change. Our team of research assistants visit different restaurants, speaking directly with managers and owners. For our interviews, we use the motivational interview approach, and Vince will describe in details. During the field work, we were able to test and refine resources for businesses. So now I will share some of our findings with all of you. With the combined efforts from all the different teams, we were able to visit 604 restaurants and coffee shops across 7 areas of the city: North York, Scarborough, Etobicoke, York, Harbourfront, St. Lawrence, Parkdale, High Park, and Midtown. We gathered data using 2 different methods: observational data collection in 600 businesses, and that means where the research assistants went to restaurants, they looked around, observed, and collect data, including details on business type, dining takeout options, types of foodware used for dining, and signs of customers being allowed to bring their own containers. And for 184 businesses, alongside the observational data, we also conduct a semi-structured survey. As you can see here, the breakdown by neighborhood that we visit. The number of restaurants participating in each neighborhood varied, and it's related to the size and the time we spend in each neighborhood, but it's also the willingness of restaurants to participate in our research. Observational data helped us to identify the categories of food service businesses. Among these establishments, 30% were full-service restaurants and bars serving primarily food for dining. The remaining were a mix of fast casual and fast food restaurants with higher rates of takeout, where fast casual use a mix of disposable and reusable foodware with a combination of takeout and dining orders, and the fast food primarily use disposable foodware for both dining and takeout orders. After categorize the restaurants types, we want to know how do they serve their food for dining orders, how they serve their food for takeout orders. Among the 604 businesses, 510 offered dining options with seating capacities ranging from 2 to 500 seats. Full-service restaurants and bars had the highest rate of reusable foodware for dining at 81%. In contrast, when you look at other categories, you see higher usage of single-use foodware, which is represented here with the light blue color. Fast food and fast casual restaurants with counter services are more likely to use single-use foodware for dining. Some fast casual restaurants use reusable foodware for dining, but mix reusable with single-use items for orders. For example, a coffee shop can serve a single-use hot drink cup with a reusable plate for a snack. The variation in practice means some restaurant types use significantly more single-use items than others, presenting a great opportunity to reduce waste by adjusting their practices. And then for takeout, we look into 2 practices: if the businesses accept customers to bring their own, and returnable takeout services. For the business interviewed, 66% of them accept customers to bring their own. We have a variation per neighborhood ranging from 33 to 92% of businesses accept BYO practices. Last year, when we talked to business, we didn't have a municipal policy in place mandating business to accept BYO practices with cups, and it was voluntary. Even without the policy, most said they accept BYO. However, the majority of businesses, 72%, reported that very few customers, less than 2% actually, bring their own cups and containers. The low level of participation may be in part due to lack of encouragement. We saw that 65% reported that they did not actively promote or encourage customers to bring their own foodware for takeout. This demonstrates an opportunity for restaurants and customers who mutually would benefit from the BYO. We also noticed that the two neighborhoods with the highest BYO acceptance rates have active reduced groups. And then restaurants were surveyed about offering returnable takeout options where they provide durable cups and containers for customers so they can use and then return with or without a monetary deposit. Only a handful of establishments, 6 in total, reported offering this service, primarily in the more central downtown areas of the city. Similar to our previous findings, there is a significant potential to expand these programs and find ways to increase participation by customers. We learned from the previous years that convenience was a top priority for customers. Therefore, to be effective, we should have strategies to make this more convenient for customers. One strategy could be putting these programs in several restaurants in very busy areas with a collaborative return system, such as bins on sidewalks or inside the restaurants to facilitate container returns. Ideally, this will lead to a cultural shift, making the returning containers a routine. And we hope we see this in futures very soon. We also want to assess the readiness of business to switch to reusables. During our interview, we presented a ruler that was very similar to this one, and they had to point where they were in the ruler. Close to 1 mean they were not thinking about switching to reusable. Close to 5, they were thinking about it. And close to 10, they were taking actions to switch to reusables. Our interview was designed to lead to this moment where the owner or the manager would feel comfortable to share an honest answer. And there is a psychology behind this, and Vince will explain about it. But what we learned is that 25% expressed that they are currently not thinking about shifting from single-use to reusable foodware. That would be the scale from 1 to 4. On the other hand, 57% are considering the switch to reusable, and that would be the scale from 5 to 8, while an encouraging 18% are taking action to transition to reusable option. That would be our scale from 9 to 10. So we were very surprised to see that 3 out of 4 restaurants surveyed are considering, they're ready for, or already taking actions to switch to reusable foodware. And we are sharing the readiness scale by location here, just because we know that we have some reduced groups in this call today who wants to celebrate and learn more about the readiness of the businesses in their own community. And then the final point I would like to highlight is the resources we developed and share with businesses. While I won't cover all of them, you can find them on our website. For instance, for BYO, Bring Your Own, we shared an infographic that illustrates how business can safely manage BYO cups and containers. This is in the back of the flyer. And one thing that I would like to mention is that we only distributed the guides that were relevant to each businesses. And we did so with their permission. So in conclusion, we went to restaurants across the whole city, and we observed that business were still using disposable for dining and massively for takeout. Most businesses accept BYO, and some have returnable for takeout. However, few customers are using it. We also learned that business wants to talk, they want to learn, and they want to make change. We learned that it's very important to take the time to talk and listen to the businesses. And this last conclusion actually ties very well with our next speaker, Maitri, who was one of the research assistants for this study. So Maitri, it's passing to you.
Thanks, Rafaela. Hello, everyone. My name is Maitri, and I was one of the research assistants with the U of T trash team last year. Today, I'm going to be sharing a little bit about my experience. So when I first began the role, I was actually really nervous because at the time I had just graduated from university, and then I also didn't have much work experience. So I remember looking at the job application and seeing that I'd have to go into businesses and speak to managers and owners. So I was very, very nervous about that, and I didn't really know if I'd be able to do it at the time. However, after meeting everybody on the team during our first orientation, I knew that I was in good hands. From our first meeting, everyone from T, GNN, St. Lawrence Waste Reduction Group, and of course the U of T trash team were also very kind and caring and established an environment of safety for us all. Even more, I remember practicing motivational interviewing with Vince on the first day, and that was able to establish an incredibly safe space for all of us to practice the survey and also make our mistakes before going into the field. We were lucky that we had the opportunity to continue these sessions throughout the process. So every week after and also like before going into the field, we'd be able to speak with our supervisors and with Vince to practice the parts of the survey that we were not confident in and to also share our feedback based on our experiences in the field. Eventually, this feedback transitioned into shifting a couple parts of the survey around to make it easier for us when conducting in the field. And although going into the field was still a bit nerve-wracking for me, since I have a lot of social anxiety, so despite practicing a lot, I still will always carry a bit of nerves around with me wherever I go. It felt a lot better being able to do it with a partner, being able to bounce off of someone else's sort of interview. Anytime I needed help, I'd be able to ask my partner for it, and also being able to check in with each other while we were in the field was really, really helpful and made me feel a lot safer. And as the weeks progressed, I found myself turning much better at conducting these surveys and more confident in my ability to navigate conversations. In fact, I learned so much from business owners and managers. They were all incredibly kind and open to sharing their perspective. We learned so much from them. And I think that can be seen in all of the data that we shared today. Overall, this was truly an opportunity that came during a time I needed it most. And so I'll always be very grateful. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope my experience was somewhat helpful. I'll be passing it on to Vince now.
Hello. So I just wanted to kind of share a little bit about what is this whole motivational interviewing thing that we've heard these words repeated, motivational interviewing. And so in my experience, when people hear the words motivational interviewing, they have a tendency to think about like, oh, so I'm gonna interview you and I'm going to motivate you with all the motivation that's in me. And really it's a bit different than that. So what I wanted to do is I want to actually help you to kind of get a feel a little bit for what motivational interviewing is not, and then what motivational interviewing is by comparison. So I'm going to ask everybody to do a little visualization with me that's going to take about 40 seconds. So I would like everybody, wherever you are, even if you're not on the screen, that's fine. I want you to close your eyes and go with me on a journey. So there you are, you're walking down the street. It's a city street, and you see Up ahead, there's somebody, it looks like they're smoking. You start to walk and as you start to get closer, you think, oh, geez, I could really like maybe help that person a bit. So your compassion goes up a bit and you're like, I should help them because they might get cancer. So then you get close to them and then the force comes over you and you decide you're going to intervene, you're going to help them quit smoking. So I want everybody in your mind's eye right now, I want you to imagine that you're going to help them quit smoking. So go ahead and do that. Okay, now I want you to imagine, what do they say back to you after you just said what you said to them? What do they say back after you said your bit? Now, sometimes I ask people to put it in the chat, but maybe I won't do that this time because sometimes there's expletives there. There's like the percent and the caret and the dollar sign and the number sign because it's not very nice. So what was when we approached them with relatively low curiosity and acceptance, a touch more compassion, but maybe not that much. And the empathy was kind of not low. It was our version of what we thought they were doing with that cigarette. This example shows us how we kind of communicate naturally, which is we end up evoking resistance towards the very point that we are actually trying to get somebody to make a change on. So if you can go to the next slide. So this is why we're doing motivational interviewing training. Motivational interviewing is going to help us, among other things, it's going to help us increase our curiosity, acceptance, compassion, and empathy to these high levels and use that in a conversation. And when we do, different things come out of me. And when I'm talking to a restaurateur or somebody who's smoking on the street, I'm going to evoke something different. I'm going to be more capable of evoking something we refer to as change talk, a possibility for change in the future. And that is something that we actually did in the survey, which is imbuing elements of this motivational interviewing into the survey. So if you want to go to the next slide. So there's many different ways that we might be communicating, and motivational interviewing can kind of influence how those communications are driven. And ultimately, when it affects us, it affects how our audience is going to receive us as well. So that could be an in-person communication, which, this is kind of like that. Ish. In writing, if I'm writing an email, writing, some of these materials, we've created a new word around the office, MIify. We want to MIify that. Or in the survey, where we have a conversation and there's almost like this third entity in the room, which is this survey, this recording of the answer. Bringing MI concepts into each one of these things, and how do we actually look for the opportunity to create change in each of these communications structures. And we wanted to make sure that there was a continuous steady stream of support. So as Maithri mentioned, we did offer continuing weekly coaching support for the entire survey team to be able to continually look at how they might strengthen their skill in motivational interviewing and the use of these surveys. So I think that is enough from me. So I'm going to pass it off to Emily.
Thank you, Vince. Hi, everyone. So I'm Emily. I'm from the Toronto Environmental Alliance. And as Rafaela mentioned at the beginning, we've been collaborating on this research and product design for a number of years. And we're really interested in what this enormous amount of data that we've collected actually means for communities and for policymakers. So I'll share a little bit about that. Next slide. From a research project perspective, to really understand the difficulty and complexity of adopting reusables, we need to reach actual business decision makers, the managers and the owners of the businesses in all the restaurants across Toronto. This is really time consuming. It requires a lot of patience and a lot of time. It requires ensuring realistic timelines and resources are provided to the outreach team, including time to go back. So we haven't included any stats on it, but my three and the other research assistants went back to the businesses multiple times. They had a complex tracking sheet on, identifying a time when the business manager or owner would be in, so they could be invited to participate in the interview, or going back when they said they had more time. And I think the results speak for themselves. We had almost a third of those who were invited to participate in the interviews did participate. So, 180 something out of 604 is pretty good. We had a good response, and people who were interested in really sharing their experience. Outreach teams also need to be sensitive. As my three and Vince have talked about, it's really important to recognize, especially when you're talking to small business owners and small business managers, they have a lot of competing interests. They have a lot of pressure on them. And it can be really easy from an environmentalist's perspective to go in there and to be perceived as being very judgmental, finger wagging, telling people what they're doing wrong, telling them why they need to change the world, like telling someone why they need to give up smoking when they don't necessarily want that advice from you. Or also that we're going to come in and catch them out, try to shame them for something that they're doing wrong, or report them to Toronto Public Health or something. So we recognize that if we really want to build support and recognize the needs of small businesses, we need to go in there very sensitively, take that extra time that is really important, because just dropping off flyers or mailing something out isn't necessarily going to get the information we want from businesses. In our earlier phases of research, we found that just inviting people to participate wasn't as effective as going back and meeting them right there in their business. So that's another thing, is that partnering with community groups really assisted with our outreach. It helped us really identify target neighborhoods where to go door to door, so that we weren't just selecting ones that we knew. We wanted to go systematically through each area. And they provided a lot of local support, context, and volunteers and staff. Next slide. In terms of the actual results, we saw that the local community groups also had an impact on the research data collection, but also associated with impact with areas with more activity. So there was higher readiness for change rankings on the ruler when they were asked. The areas also had a higher acceptance rate for bring your own cups and containers. As Rafaela mentioned, some of these areas had groups called reduces groups. And for those of you who don't know, these are community-based groups that have operated in different parts of Toronto, where just community members have gone into their local businesses and said, hey, would you let me take my own container into your business to get my food or drink order? And if they say yes, they'll put a sticker in the window to help advertise that and promote it. So this sort of direct relationship between community members and customers and their own local businesses can help really streamline that conversation and build more support. And these areas were also more likely to have reusable, returnable takeout systems. We find that areas with some early adopters and with a concentration of businesses taking steps to reduce waste can influence both the customers in that area, but it can also be a model for other businesses who can see, okay, that guy down the street has returnable takeout, or that person over there is doing this, and that can be a great way to learn and to promote change. Next slide, please. Aside from encouraging and promoting the adoption of reusables, there's also a critical role for policies and regulations. As has been mentioned earlier, research and this kind of outreach can help inform those decisions. As you may have noticed by the timeline, all this research was conducted in the summer 2023. This is a snapshot in time when there were no enforced restrictions or regulations on single-use items in Toronto, only voluntary measures and things that were encouraged and promoted. Since then, there's been some big regulations that have started. The federal ban on some single-use plastics has started, though there's some uncertainty around the status of that regulation. When we talked, we did hear from many businesses in the summer that they were already making changes to their practices, that they either had chosen different materials in place of single-use plastics, or that they could no longer buy them because they weren't available. So there was already some shift in thinking around that. Also, since then, the Toronto has passed some simple regulations requiring that businesses ask first before giving out accessories like utensils and condiments and bags, which immediately reduces waste because it means people are only getting things if they want it. And also requiring that all restaurants accept when a customer brings their own cup. So while we were reporting on the information about businesses that had previously accepted BYO, now it's required everywhere. But we know that most of them were already okay with it. So that's really great. This research has provided a baseline of attitudes and readiness, and this can hopefully also inform other regulations under consideration. Next slide. Aside from those that are already applying in Toronto right now, across Canada and around the world, there are a lot of jurisdictions considering regulations that restrict single use and require reusables. For example, some countries and Canadian cities require reusable cups or dishes for dine-in, for on-site dining. That's in Banff, Terrebonne near Montreal. Some countries are requiring returnable reusable takeout options, like in Germany. They started with larger chains before bringing it down to smaller restaurants. And reusables at events and closed systems like venues and campuses. One fact that I really like to share is that the Paris Olympics, it's happening in a few weeks, will have all reusable dishes, utensils, and cups at their athletes' village and all public events. So we know this is happening in different places. And as we consider these policies, a really important question is, what is the impact on small businesses? In contrast to chains, they typically have more control over their own operations, and we notice this in our interviews with them. But they also have less capacity and access to resources to respond to those changes. So our research really emphasized connecting with small businesses and local community partners to get that local granular information about what types of resources businesses need. Next slide. So here's our key recommendations. They're all number one because we could not choose which one was the most important recommendation. This is in our report. First of all, policies and regulations that require a shift really help move everyone in the same direction. Voluntary measures have been, encouraging businesses to start thinking about it. But once we pass a policy, that's really having an impact. These can be phased in, and they should consider the variation in service types. As Rafaela mentioned, fast food and fast casual restaurants use a lot more disposables than full service restaurants. Some restaurants already have dishwashing capacity and some don't. Some are chains and some are small and independent. So regulations can be phased in considering those different variations. Support needs to be provided for businesses in the form of guidance, financial support for adopting reuse, and we need to ensure that this support reaches the smallest operators that need it the most. That may require door-to-door outreach to actually make them understand what's available, invite them to appreciate what's available. Considering the needs of the local community is also important. Providing enough time and resources for an outreach team to actually connect with local businesses, consider the local languages, and identify community groups or early adopters that can help with promoting the benefits. And public promotion, continuing to promote the benefits of reuse and harms of single use. This can take the pressure off local businesses to explain what's changing in their practice. And our last slide here. So this, after our high-level recommendations for what this means for policymakers, we also want to talk about our recommendations for what community members can do. We have a lot of great community members who were part of this project in the summer who are here today, and we think there's a lot that we can learn. Active community groups can be very helpful. We've got sort of this menu of options about thinking about things you can do in your own life, the people around you, what kinds of events you might be hosting this summer. Is there any ways to reduce waste at those events? Or thinking about your favorite restaurant and the relationship you have with a local restaurant that you go to, and what kind of impact you can have there in terms of inviting them to consider reducing single use. Then there's thinking about your community, your workplace, school, religious institution, or other organization that you're part of. Are there ways that your group can help tackle single-use plastic? Or do you think other people there would like to learn about this? We have, we'd be happy to come talk about reuse and different sort of strategies and help your group think through how they can shift to reuse. So please let us know about that. And then lastly, we have, we're inviting people, if you're interested as part of a community group or as an individual, if you want to join some training in this motivational interviewing approach, we are looking to continue help with, to continue collecting data and talking with small businesses across the city to sort of build on what we've seen last year and track changes over time. So these are things that we'll be talking about in the after questions. We'll invite you all to stick around, or anyone who wants to stick around and dig in a little bit more to what this research means, how you can apply it in your community. and sort of share your ideas about what you want to do. And that would be when we could talk a lot more about these opportunities. And that's it. I'll hand it back to Susan. Thank you.
That was amazing. So as many of you will have noted, there's a lot more that you probably want to know about. So we'll do a Q&A before we continue on for those who wish to stay. And how this will work is if you have a question, just type it in the chat and we'll answer as many as we can. If you wish to ask your question out loud, we can alternate back and forth. To do so, to let us know, there's a raise hand option. It should be on the lower portion of your screen next to the reactions. And if we see a hand raised, we'll let you know that we're coming to you next. And then we'll take you off mute, ask your question, and we'll put you on mute again, unless you have more to ask afterwards. So I will monitor, Chelsea and I are going to be monitoring to see questions that are coming, and then our lovely speakers will share their insights. So yes, who has a question? Hey, I see a question in the chat right away. And what is the status of the project now, further phases and funding? That's a great question. I already see Rafaela's body language wanting to answer, so go ahead, Rafaela.
Yeah, so we don't have funding for that piece, and so we are now starting to analyze, and we have all the reports, and we have to write in papers and more academic setup. So we will spend the summer doing this, but we are also help T, who probably will lead more outreach during the summer. So Emily, you can say a little bit more about this.
Yeah, on that, we'll be using some of our summer research team or summer staff, and also connecting with some of the community groups that have been part of this project. We're hoping that we can really mobilize some people to help us continue with that outreach and research. And then Rafaela, you also have some pilot studies that you need to share about, but that'll be another webinar, not today.
Yeah, so stay tuned. We are wrapping up a pilot. We were doing testing reusable options in 6 restaurants here in the city. So 2 for BYO, how to improve BYO in their restaurants, and 1 with cups, reusable cups, how customers can bring and return their cups, and 3 with returnable takeout. And we are wrapping up, and we will share this during the fall in a webinar with all the restaurants.
Great. So thank you for that question, Laura. We have one from Jillian that's a great question. And the question is getting at, were there any concerns around food safety, contamination, operational challenges when it came to places that were using reuse? If they're already taking reuse measures, did they mention concerns about food safety, contamination? You can see the full question in the chat there. Who would like to answer that one? I think either Rafaela or Emily or both.
Yeah, I think that this conversation comes a lot in different setup. When business they're not comfortable doing, one of the reasons is because of safety. For those who are using returnable, we are seeing, for example, we are testing with the pilot. They are of course concerned, and that's why they decided in BYO is the same here in the city. You can refuse to use the cups, or you can refuse to provide your drink into in the customer mug if you feel that is not clean enough. For the BYO, for the returnable ones, for the pilots, the business who are using, they are not worried about it, because they have, or they are doing the dishes in their own, like the cups, they are washing in their own dishwasher in their own restaurants, or they have the returnable container and they say that it's pretty clean, pretty sanitized. They are not complaining about this.
And to add about that, there's been some other research and reports from a group called Upstream. They have an excellent report called Reuse Wins, and they also reviewed a number of case studies of businesses adopting reusables in the US by a group called Rethink Disposable. And what they found and what we've seen from some businesses is there's some perception around the difficulty and the process for adopting reusable dishes, but usually once people get over that first hurdle, it's a little bit easier. So, when we ask some businesses that were already using reusables, do you have any advice for other businesses? And they say, just do it. It's so much easier than you realize, or you don't realize how much time you're spending ordering single-use items and stocking them and managing them. Just move on to it. So it feels like the ones who are already doing it, they've kind of gotten over that concern. And those who haven't done it yet sort of need a bit more evidence and help to get over that hurdle.
Great. Okay, we've had a flurry of questions come in, and I hope there's many of you are able to stay because we can get into some of these in more depth in the next half hour. I'll just give you the heads up. The next question I'm going to send over to you, Vince, and then the following one, I think Emily, the one about Swiss chalet containers would be good for you to answer. You can read that question there. So for Vince, the question is about advice on how to motivate peers and family who don't believe in recycling, reducing, reusing. That's a big question.
Yeah, it's so when we look at this, I had a feeling this was going to come over to me,
Yeah.
and it's okay. I accept this question. And you see, there's something special that I just did in my body language, which is I said, I accept this question. And I was like, it was coming in and I wasn't opposing it at all. And sometimes when we go into a conversation with a family member, we have a bit of a, let's call it a chronic history, where it's just sort of like we've had a conversation like that before, or a conversation on a different topic where it's just sort of like you're the voice of change. And when we become the voice of change, then the person that we're speaking to that we want to make the change ultimately becomes the voice of resistance to that change. So whenever we become the voice of change and they're the voice of resistance, we end up actually making the problem a little bit worse. So I would say that really, it sounds like you want some motivational interviewing learning, and that could be really useful to figure out how do I go into this situation where I've got somebody who I've had these conversations where it's been very ineffective in the past, and how do I forge a new pathway that's not going to go the same way that it's gone before? And I'd actually bring you back to the slides that I presented and say, how can I actually find curiosity? If I would say anything else, I would say there's and this is just a little sprinkle of stuff from the full workshop series. There's this concept of emotional mirroring, which is if we feel a little angsty, then we make other people feel a little angsty. But if we feel a little bit curious, then we help other people to feel a little bit curious, including to our own position. So maybe even just finding a little bit of that emotional mirroring and how can I actually bring myself down a notch before I start this conversation.
So in case the chat has gone a little bit further, Emily has just commented, that's great, that the free training that Vince has offered, if you are interested in getting more of these tools, that would be a great resource to look into. And I actually missed a question, so I'll go to Rafa and then to Emily. Rafa, just talk about reusable takeout. Have we reached out to any existing businesses, i.e. supply, for ways we can work together? And we have a question, so we'll try to keep our answers a little bit shorter. Sorry.
Yes, so for the pilot, we were working with Supply and Muse for this, and they were all great.
Lots more to come on the pilot later in the year.
Yes.
Okay, this next question.
Actually, I can jump in, Susan, because this actually answers a question that Lee raised. One of the resources that we created was explaining about returnable, reusable takeout. And we had a little infographic that's like, here's how it works. And here's a list of the companies in Toronto that we know of that offer this service. So we were able to give that out to people. And yeah, we connected with all of those service providers so that we could, promote them and encourage people to find which one works best for their business.
Awesome.
So maybe we can drop the link in to respond to Lee.
Yes, I think I believe Chelsea already sent at the beginning, but maybe she can send it again. Yeah,
and what we'll try to do is we have when we send the recording out, we'll gather as many of these links as possible, and we can include that in an email to come in a little bit when the recording's ready. So that was from Lee was asking about a brochure, which we just answered. There's a question about, I think someone else answered about the like cardboard. So we talked about plastic, but there's other types of materials. So just curious about what about those options for takeout, example of Swiss chalet being using the cardboard. So just a short snippet of opinion on that process.
Yeah.
You can go if you want. Yeah.
Yeah, someone else mentioned it, but the fact is that our focus has been on reusables generally. We don't want people switching from single-use plastic to single-use paper, single-use metal, single-use glass. The reality is that every material that you use just once has a big footprint, and it always is better to use reusables. So that's why we keep talking about reusables generally and not just plastics and not just other things. So yeah, those other materials are just a distraction from the real solution, which is reuse.
Yeah, and then there's some commentary here on the waste management complexities there as well. Or when you do get to dispose of it, there's various regulations there.
Yeah, materials with liners that goes to garbage actually, so it's not recycled here in Toronto.
Yeah, there's a bit of a claim that sometimes people make of like, oh, it's compostable. It's like, that's not compostable. And I saw somebody posted that in the chat, and like, just us, like, we thought a lot about that, which is like, how do we actually avoid somebody trying to like switch from, single-use plastic to single-use compostable, i.e. not compostable. So anyway, next.
Yeah, our question is from Nicole. I'm actually not sure if we have the answer for this, so I'll turn it to Rafaela, but curious about if we're working with, so we're from U of T, but are we working with any other higher education institutions? I know for some of our other projects we do, but has shared here at York, which is great to know that you're also working on how to further expand reusables on campus. So thank you for doing so.
Yes, no, we are not working. Would be amazing to work with other groups. We know about some reusable that's happening in other universities or college here in Toronto, but we haven't worked with York yet.
Yeah. Okay.
Perhaps there's opportunity. We also have Calvin Lecken. For any of you who know him, he's a waste guru and has done a lot of work on waste. So happy to have a further conversation and perhaps linkages there. And Vince, nice to see you. I want to chat further with you as well.
Hey, thanks, Nicole. A question from Mark, just curious, is this currently only in Toronto? Well, a lot of this, Mark, if you're able to stay for the next 30 minutes, we can get into the depth, because a lot of this, the goal here is how, currently, yes, it's in Toronto, but maybe Emily, you can just recap a little bit about your kind of concluding presentation about how communities can engage.
Sorry, can you say that question again? I missed the first part of it.
For sure. Mark was just saying, joined late, was just curious, is this only in Toronto? Also related to the ongoing conversation, what do you share to restaurants to improve their confidence in meeting health unit? What is the saving cost for businesses? Now that I read it more, anyone can feel free to jump in to answer that. But I was referring mostly to, is the project only in Toronto? And the answer is yes, but it's a yes, but. So
yes, great question. So this work we've done, we're very intentional, about being very on the ground, talking face to face with businesses in really diverse neighborhoods to try to capture like what kind of variation do we see. But I know that other municipalities and other places across the country are interested in these results, and we really do want to share how we've done this. So we're happy to share the training and some of the research questionnaires and approaches, and hopefully this can be replicated. And we do believe that the results and the conclusions that we're finding here are going to be applicable across the country.
Rafaela, to put you on the spot, and I see your hand raised, Vince, so we'll come right back to you to add your thought. I just noticed the saving cost. Maybe you can briefly mention coming up the modeling aspect of it, because I think that's like, we didn't get too in depth with there.
Yes, we are calculated to see how much they were reducing. The data is showing that if they are preventing waste, they are also saving money when they are not, because they don't need to buy it single-use foodware. So that is a benefit. But the most important that we are highlight is how many they are saving from ended up in the environment or ended up in the garbage. So I think that's one of the most important things that we want to share. But in our resources, we have a different resource for different for business who wants to do different things. So we have one all about single use, the problem of single use, and we share a little bit how this will impact the environment. We also have one all about returnable takeout, and we have a list with businesses that it's providing here in Toronto and how they can, how works. And then for BYO, how you can safely handle this. And we also have one about compostable and why questions that business can ask for customers to start the conversation with customers to increase participation. So you can all find those informations in our website.
So I'll let Vince share if you still had a comment you wanted to add, and then I'm going to go to one more question that I'm going to group together before we wrap up, because we keep getting questions, which is great. We are nearing the time when we want to leave that 30 minutes to really get into deeper conversation. So go ahead, Vince, and then I'll group that question.
Yeah, so I was going to say quickly about the confidence in response to Maug. When we look at like a motivational interviewing MI approach, just using like an affirmation where we like affirm sort of like a past success or affirm sort of even a thought that's moving in the right direction. The affirmations really do a lot to improve the confidence of an individual. So like the MI construct of affirmation, or just, and we know what affirmations are, those can really go a very, very long way to improving confidence.
Great, that's amazing. So I'm just gonna, they're two separate questions, but I'll try to group them. One, it's essentially, what is the type of restaurants? Were they small independent? Were there larger franchises? Why or why not? And then within those restaurants, what kinds of concerns or maybe hidden costs did they express?
Yeah, so in terms of sample, we avoided to the majority of business that we interview and we visit were local chain or local independent businesses, because we avoid to visit many times big chains. So we don't need to ask 5 times for Tim Hortons what their practices are, because we know and they do the same. So we focus on independent restaurants for this research.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We visited some chains, but then after a while, it's like, that's kind of a waste of time. And then also there was a few interviews with some of the bigger chains, but a lot of the answers would be, I'm sorry, that's decided at head office, or I can't answer those questions because I don't have the authority to participate in your interview. So there's a little bit of effort to reach those chains, but then at a certain point, we recognize that if the students are putting the time in to go around to these places, we need to focus on the ones where we're going to get the most valuable information.
For the second part of this question, actually, I'd love to hear from you, my three, because I know you were doing a lot of these conversations. So I'll go a little bit over time to give you that chance. Just from your conversations, what were some of the, barriers and boundaries people shared that we can play a role in supporting?
I think one of the things was, like Emily said, like they would have to go to higher up, like officials, and this was specifically for like the like bigger businesses, and so we ended up like kind of shifting towards the smaller organizations. I think one thing as well is like when we were doing all of the surveys, we were kind of shocked by the number of businesses that were actually really interested in shifting to more sustainable and like reusable options. But then I think when it came down to, which I don't think we really spoke about, but like even like the pilot project, like I think the biggest thing was kind of like resources, staff training, things like that. It was going to be a big shift. And then also like one thing that I noticed too is that it's really tough on restaurants, especially during like the winter season. So they're like really trying their best to like continue business and do well. And so like as much as they really care and they really want to make changes, unless they get the help that they need from the government and other larger organizations kind of making that change and promoting customers to be more sustainable and reusable, it's difficult for them to do it on their own. But like, again, it was really wonderful to see that they were all very, very interested and they want to make change, but it's difficult.
Well, thank you for the very, very engaged Q&A. The questions keep coming, so we'll have to cut this off now. Rafael, you can put the final slide up, and I'll actually turn it back to Rafaela to close out the formal portion of the webinar before we transition to those final 30 minutes. And thank you.
Awesome.
If anyone has to drop off, that's totally fine. I see a few in the chat.
All right, thanks, Susan.
Yeah.
So today's webinar has been made possible with the support from the partners in Project Green. So thank you for that. And thank you so much again for all of you for taking the time to join us in this webinar. Please let's stay in touch. You can contact all of us. You can contact us anytime. Email, social media. We all have social media. So we will share the recording soon with emails, with some links for everything that you are asking about the resources and all the reports. We can share this later. And now we are closing here just the recording, and you are invited to stay for an extra 30 minutes where we will open the space for you to take the floor and share your thoughts on what's next for you and what is next for you and for your community, and what we all can do it together. So thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.